Today we're going to talk about HDR photography, or high dynamic range photography. What is HDR photography? When you take a standard photograph with a digital or film camera, the resulting image has a certain dynamic range limited to the physics and technology of the camera. It will photograph the brightest highlight and the darkest shadow and all the midtones at a certain setting. Sometimes, much like the shot you see on my desktop here, you will have a bright sunlight in the distance, you'll have forests in the dark shadows, you'll have clouds, you'll have tones. A standard approach to HDR photography is to take a photograph at the average exposure that you normally would, but then using a tripod or steadying yourself very well with automatic settings or manual settings, a shot that's 2 f-stops underexposed by changing your shutter speed and 2 f-stops greater exposed using your shutter speed. You could try using your aperture, you could try using your ISO, but you'll get various results based on noise and depth of field that are inconsistent. Only a steady camera on a tripod by changing shutter speed can provide identical shots without manipulating the characteristics of the shot. Well, if you were to take 3 exposures, a middle, a dark, and a light, you would be able to take those files, compile them in a software such as the one I'm going to use called Photomatix, and create a 32-bit image. But really, by doing these 3 exposures, you can compile these 16-bit files, get a 32-bit image, then tone map, which is a process I will show you, that will bring basically all those photos back into a low dynamic range visible spectrum. Sorry if that sounds really wordy, but that's how you say it. I've taken 5 exposures of this one setting here of a shoreline. So I've processed out these images. I'm going to grab these 5 images, and by dragging them to this icon for Photomatix that I have sitting here, little umbrella, it's going to ask me, do I want to merge them for processing? I'm going to say okay. Align the images, but I think because I had it on a tripod, it should be fairly aligned already. I want to automatically remove ghosts, such as water splashing or birds flying. And I'm not going to reduce noise on the darker images. I'm going to trust that these images should be okay. What's taking place next is once this has been loaded into a 32-bit file, we're going to approach the whole tone mapping or exposure fusion methods, which is basically taking that 32-bit image and trying to make it translate into a 16-bit or 8-bit kind of visual spectrum. Those rocks are looking really interesting now, and we still have all that highlight and tonal detail out there over the water. I'm going to click on a few presets, trying to find, and this is what I tend to do, I try to find a setting that's close to where I want to go, and then I do minor tweaks. If it's your first time starting with the software, there's a lot of built-in presets that will do something similar. I tend to play with settings that once I've found something I like, I save it and I can tweak. So for example, if I really wanted a warm sky, it doesn't quite work for me here, but there are settings. This one here is a little bit bright and contrasty. I know I generally like this one here. It has a nice warm color in the sky. I'm going to try down here. Let's go to this one here. Bump up the saturation. And we should be almost identically to where I want to go. So let me explain some of these tools a bit. The lighting adjustments is the real reason we're in tone mapping. Most people have the most difficulty acclimating to this particular tool. There are 2 lighting adjustments. There's lighting effects, and then there's the slider bar. The slider bar allows for gradual assessment and alteration. So you will slide this bar around trying to find the optimal setting. Now I'm going to compare that to the lighting effects tool, and I actually think I like the lighting effects a bit more. It does blow out the sky, but the rocks look a lot more interesting right there. Black point will darken some areas, but really punch out the color. White point may or may not enhance the sky. I'm going to bump the gamma up to about here, bump the black point to about there, and really like the results of what we have here. I could play with the color temperature, go a bit cooler, a bit warmer, but I'm going to stay pretty standard. Micro smoothing kind of smooths out any noise. You'll notice in this area here in particular a really grainy look and feel. I'm going to smooth this out to the bare minimum required because I find it gets too flat when I do micro smoothing. And I think I'm pretty happy with everything else. I'll dump this and this. Let's go up to the luminosity tool. There, I'm going to hit process, and we have our image. And we can just go ahead and do some finishing touches and then save this and we're done.